you talking about all this stuff in post. Um, how long did it take for you? What was like the moment that it kind of clicked for you? Like, oh, my identity is like the sum of these parts and not just this one singular thing like it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's sort of always evolving, right? For me, it's like I think like, I had a really good friend say to me once, because like people have a tendency to talk about growth in a really linear, like hierarchical way, right? Like my growth means like this year I'm a VP, next year I'm an SVP. And I had a really good friend once tell me, he's like, we were having a conversation and God, I feel like I learned so much this year. And he's like, dude, that's growth. Like, that's it, right? Like, that's the thing. So I think for me, it's like, man, just trying to figure out uh, I do think there are like particular moments. Like for me, my son went through some medical stuff. Um, and that was like a pretty solidifying moment for me where I was like, man, okay, like priorities, right? Having a second kid, right? Like is certainly like, you just are like, man, this is, I need to focus on what's really important, watching parents age, right? Like the normal life stuff, I think is like forcing factors for a lot of these things. Um, the reality is I didn't think about any of that when I got out, right? Like and I think I told you this when we talked, like, I mean, my first year of transition out of the military, I just worked my ass off, right? Like I worked so hard. I was like, I will not fail, right? Like I'm not going to be the guy who got out and was a failure. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I was traveling all the time. Right. And look, like that was huge for me. Right. Cause it was a great baseline and it really solidified, I think, some of my reputation and ability to do that sort of stuff. But then there are like natural moments where life like reminds you that you're not quite in control. Right. And I think at each of those moments, you just have to sit back and reflect and think about like, okay, well, like, look, how am I going to make this work for me, work for my family? Um, if that's what's the priority and important to you, right? Um, and that I think is like the defining thing for me is like just taking those moments to be like, okay, like what's important right now, and what do I need to be focused on?
Do you think that it requires I think that there's like two levels of understanding. There's like the logical level of understanding where you can say something, and then there's one where you actually believe and feel it. And do you think that it requires those forcing factors to actually drop belief down from logic into like feeling? For example, um, I told a lot of people as I was getting out, I want to support my wife's career. My wife's still in the Air Force, so I'm going to get job. I want to support her, and like that's important to me. But I only ever looked at jobs that were in small startups where, looking back on it, no way that those jobs would have been able, like, would have allowed me to support my wife. And it took one guy that mentored me to really check me and say, you need to chill on that because there's no way that a startup is going to allow you to be a good military spouse at the level that you want to be at. So you need to start looking at like Amazon's and Google's and Microsoft's because they will. And I was like, oh wow, like I've telling people that, but I never the my logic had never dropped down into my belief, so my actions did not reflect. And so,
Yeah, that's really interesting point. Yeah, I mean, look, I think my self awareness has grown probably 1,000% since leaving the military. Because I don't really know why. I think it's mostly just like you're always in execute mode. Um, but I've also like, going into a software startup, an international company, we're exposed to a bunch of different perspectives and ideas, and it challenges uh, how you think about things. And I actually am like quite happy with that, right? Like I want to be challenged in a lot of those ways. So I think what you're highlighting though is like, and where I've like certainly derived a lot of value from like the veteran community, aspects of the veteran community, is like how do you build some of those accountability structures for yourself, right? Like once you get out, because they're like sort of intrinsically built into the military community, but then you get out and it's like, you know, who's going to challenge that, right? And I think like you and I are both like pretty lucky to still have folks, whether it's military or not, um, that certainly for me, like I could pick up the phone and call people, so like tear this apart, like what do you think, right? And get like true honest feedback. Um, because you're not going to have all the right answers, right? Like that's why you need to have other good people in your life.